Now, in one of the previous videos that I did on Saturn and Gemini, one of the things I've been discussing is how to, or aiming to, tap into the higher functions of each planet, realizing that the planets themselves are aspects of our consciousness. And that's sort of the point of astrology, is to reveal that to us, that they are aspects of our consciousness. In the same way that all these Jungian archetypes are really just aspects of our consciousness, in the same way that all the gods and the goddesses that we project as separate entities ultimately are truly a facet of our own consciousness. The planets are the same thing. And that's why we have all these myths about the planets as gods and so on, because they are powers of our own infinite consciousness, of which our personality and our body is just an individualized, seemingly individualized portion. But someone asked me, well, how do you develop Saturn? And we should really go over this for all of the planets, so we'll see how time permits. But the question is, how do you develop Saturn? And that's a good question, because of all the planets, that's probably one of the more difficult ones to even consider developing. But that's mainly because of what Saturn rules over. What Saturn represents is not necessarily what any of us want to seek out to develop, at least in our current age, where we don't quite understand the value of Saturn, or many of us don't. We have difficulty with it. It's easy to think about developing the moon, the ability to be emotionally healthy, have good emotional boundaries, the ability to be receptive to good things that come to us instead of pushing them away because you're not worthy. Or it's easy to think about how to develop Venus, how to be more diplomatic, have more tact, how to be kinder to people, how to refine your tastes, how to not be so crude, how to enjoy things like poetry and developing art, or creating a beautiful flower garden, or as Venus does, it's about determining what is a healthy desire. You know, it is a healthy desire to be hungry and then decide that you want to eat maybe some salad for lunch because you're hungry, so the desire is there to eat, so you make a good choice, let's have some salad. That's a healthy use of Venus. Versus you're hungry, you're nervous, you're anxious, nothing else to do, let's have some candy bars. Not quite right. So Venus is about desire, but ultimately it is about healthy desire. Healthy desire. Venus can be about love, but it's about consensual love. It's not about desires that cause problems for other people. So it's easier to think about, in a sense, these other planets and how you develop them, because they're easier on our minds. They're more comfortable things to dwell upon. But Saturn, on the other hand, has some difficulty. Why? Because Saturn represents that stuff of life that we wish didn't exist, that we want to sweep under the rug, we want to ignore. It's the fact that people die. It's the fact that, hey, you can live the best life you want and you can still get a disease because of some kind of environmental issue, some kind of mental emotional issue, some kind of karmic thing that none of us can ever truly understand. Saturn is about that cold that we cannot bear, that lack that comes into our lives when, say, we've been wanting a relationship for years and years and years, but it never happens. That's a quality of Saturn, giving that lack. And no one wants to hear, oh, well, you haven't been in a relationship for a long time and you really want to be. Well, you need to develop your Saturn. And they say, well, how do I do it? And what they're saying when they say, well, how do I do it, is, how do I circumvent my karma and get that relationship right now? They don't want to hear, well, you have to develop your Saturn, which means that you need to take your mind away from relationships. You need to focus on what is most important in your life right now, which may be your health, which may be your work, which may be fixing your house. You see, the things that are presented to you that are there are the things that you're supposed to focus on. They're right here and right now. Saturn knows that, because Saturn gives us detachment to focus on what is right here, right now. The problem with Saturn arises when you're meant to focus on something right here, right now, but all you can think about is how hungry you are and you would rather have a strawberry milkshake than eat a bowl of rice porridge. You're having difficulty with Saturn when You're meant to be focusing on your job, but all you can think about is how you haven't had a relationship in 15 years. Saturn wants you to focus on what is right here and right now. And this is hard to swallow for a lot of people. So the way you develop your Saturn is by taking a cold, hard look at your life. A cold, hard look at your life. And you're not looking for what's not there and saying, yes, but my heart would be so fulfilled if I just had this one thing. You're looking at what is there and what is the work you're supposed to do on that thing. What is there and what is the work you're supposed to do on that thing? Your house is falling apart. You're still thinking about relationships. You've got food, but you're thinking about how all the people around you are dining out at 5-star restaurants. You're not supposed to be thinking about 5-star restaurants or relationships. You're supposed to be focusing on what is right there for you to deal with. And that's really the simplicity of Saturn. If someone is dying, you don't want them to die. I get it. I totally get it. But the reality of life is we all die. And most of us will get sick, whether we're saintly or not. And even many of the people that we consider to be spiritual masters develop things like cancer or died of a heart attack and so on. But they always brush that under the rug. Again, they don't want, there's this problem with human consciousness of admitting problems exist for everyone in a body. Problems exist for everyone in a body. That's what it boils down to. That is why yoga is focused on realizing you are not your body. And that's when those saints say, I am untouched by disease. I am untouched by this problem. Even though they're the sickest thing in the world, they say that they feel perfectly whole and healthy because they know they're not the body. The body is just like any other plant or animal in the world, that it has its seasons it goes through. Some of those seasons are longer than others, and then it turns back into dust. That is the reality of Saturn. And so the way that you develop your Saturn is by learning to face these realities, learning to focus on the hard work that needs to be done, learning to feel your pain, learning to experience fear and dread. And rather than run away from it, you embrace it and you feel it. And by doing that, that is part of actually the yogic process of, if you can really truly do it and hold it, endure it. Saturn's about endurance, enduring these things. You realize you're not your body. You do realize your immortality. That's one of the reasons why Saturn is one of those planets of greatness, which will take you all the way to very great states of consciousness. But everyone runs away from it because it is scary, because it is not pretty, because it does not support what the personality and the ego wants. And maybe you'll learn, maybe you won't, I don't know. I'm not sure what your path is. But most of the time, eventually, if you're paying attention to life, you realize that your personality and your ego don't really matter. And it's those people who are so hyper-fixated on getting what their ego wants, those are the ones that suffer the most. Whereas the individuals who have been able to try to embrace their Saturn, to develop their Saturn, it's those individuals that even the most horrendous circumstances has some kind of sense of peace and understanding. They don't come by it easily. None of this will come easily. At least for most people, maybe for 0.2% of us, it might. But it's learning to endure what is difficult. And that doesn't mean you sit there the whole time and say, I wish this was different, but I'm going to endure it. It's not that. It's in a sense taking a step back and saying, all right, this is what life is presenting to me right now. This is the reality of what life is presenting to me. How can I hold it? How can I hold it in a patient way? How can I even bring some love to it? And the best kind of analogy I can come up with, it's like if you have a dog that has maybe a problem biting people and you have to put a muzzle on it. Well, your role is to put a muzzle on that dog. And what some people will do is they'll try to put the muzzle on the dog and they'll get frustrated because the dog is squirming and trying to bite them and going nuts and scratching at them. Of course, that's what the dog is going to do. That's the nature of the dog. So to get mad at the nature of the dog while you're trying to do something like this is the equivalent of someone going through a Saturnine experience and acting like it should be different. Whereas the person with a healthy Saturn, a developed Saturn, will say, look, this is going to be rough. I'm going to get scratched. I'm probably going to get bitten, but I know I got to put this muzzle on this dog. So I'm going to do it. And no matter how much that dog squirms or yelps or bites at me, I'm going to maintain my sense of patience and detachment, and I'm going to get the job done. That's the bottom line of Saturn. I'm going to hold it, hold the issue, see the reality of it. I'm not going to get caught up in it. I'm not going to let my personality be hurt if I fail, even multiple times, but I'm going to endure, and I'm going to do my best and let this divine consciousness flow through me as I hold these difficulties of Saturn. So problems with relationships. Forget about relationships. Focus on something else in your life. You endure it by letting it go. That is one of the reasons why Saturn is exalted in the 7th house of the natural zodiac. This is one of the things we cover in the Rashis and signs class for the astrological apprenticeship program. When we go through all of the signs, the reason Saturn is exalted in Libra, in the 7th sign, is because Saturn, while it's about death, death is change. Death is an exchange of energy. You have to give away something. You have to let go in order to get something in exchange. So Saturn is all about having the ability to see what is worth, in a sense, holding on to, but when are you supposed to let it go? When are you supposed to let it die? Live and let die, that idea comes to mind. When are you supposed to live with what you have and then let go of, let die, that thing which has been frustrating you for years, which just doesn't seem to be working out? You have to learn to let it go. So basically, to reiterate, one of the ways that you develop Saturn is by developing a healthy sense of being able to realize that suffering is in the world and endure it. One of the best ways I found to do that is through the practice of yoga, which is why in the Yoga Sutras it says the yogi is indifferent to pleasure and pain and hot and cold. It doesn't mean they don't feel those things. They are indifferent to it. They happen. In the same way, right now I look outside and it's raining. So what? When you practice yoga, you are inside. You are in a house where the rain isn't hitting you, but it's still raining out there. You're not thinking to yourself while in the house, I just wish it wasn't raining. I could be doing so many things outside in the yard. You just know it's raining. What's the appropriate thing to do? Stay inside, make a video. That's how Saturn works. When we think about being indifferent to pleasure and pain, hot and cold, it's not about forcing yourself to ignore it. You don't imagine it's not there. You just respond appropriately to it and don't get bent out of shape by the fact that heat exists, cold exists, pleasure exists, pain exists, and there's this rise and this fall. When Saturn is strong and you developed it, Saturn sees the reality of change within the world from the smallest level to the most cosmic level and is able to accept it. To accept it as naturally as it's raining right now, and tomorrow it's going to be sunny, and another day it's going to rain, and another day it'll be sunny, and it'll snow, it'll rain, it'll be sunny. They're able to see these changes and be just seeing this reality happening. So the 7th sign, Libra, is all about exchange and trade. That's why Libra is about trade. That's, in a sense, a metaphor or an analogy, and I really need to look up what a metaphor is and what an analogy is, because I think they might be different. But it's a metaphor or an analogy of the ability to change, to exchange, to let things go when they need to let go so other things can come in. So endurance is one. Detachment is another. Learning to focus on the reality of your situation versus torturing yourself by dwelling upon what you don't have. As an astrologer, I get so many people so bent out of shape about not having the kind of relationship they think they should have. Well, maybe their chart doesn't support it. Maybe their chart supports other things you're supposed to focus on. But to tell them that is like imagining getting a nail gun and like shooting them with it. It doesn't. They don't hear what's being said because that Saturn is just a teeny weeny little seed. They haven't watered it at all. They think they have because they're suffering. But that is not a healthy Saturn. The healthy Saturn is a big tree that can endure drought, that can endure the winds of change, that can endure harsh weather. So to say that I am suffering, therefore my Saturn is strong, is just like saying my Mars is strong because I'm an aggressive asshole. No, that's not how it works. When you can see suffering for what it is and endure it and make it through to the other side, your Saturn is strong. One of the best recommendations I can give for that is a book called The Presence Process by Michael Brown. You've heard me talk about that repeatedly. The Presence Process by Michael Brown, wonderful for developing Saturn. Other ways to develop Saturn is getting involved in a disciplined yoga practice. None of the fluffy devotional stuff, well, that can be part of it in moderation, but developing a discipline to create detachment. Practicing some type of Zen meditation can be wonderful in that regard too. And this doesn't mean that you go to the extreme of being all Saturn all the time. Remember, you have other planets too. But when you need to call upon Saturn, when you need to be detached, when a problem arises and there are people screaming all around you, and you need to be cool, and you need to just get in there and see the pain, use your Mars, do what needs to be done, and get out, that's where Saturn comes into play. Then later, you can process your PTSD. But Saturn is the ability to look around, see that everything's going to crap, and yet still be able to remain cool and calm and collected and detached enough to do what needs to be done. Maybe many parents have this, have 5 or 6 kids, and then you learn to focus on what is reality or not, what is an appropriate problem, what is not, and to endure the difficulties, or go volunteer for hospice, or take care of a dying person. These will all teach you the most important things that Saturn wants you to learn. Many people bring up the idea of relationships, and I had often thought that a wonderful technique to help people improve their moderately mediocre relationships where they feel unfulfilled is to go on a retreat and not have any contact with their spouse and really role play, imagine that their spouse has died, has passed away. If that doesn't trigger you to understand how much you have missed with your spouse, if that doesn't trigger you to have regrets about how you treated them, if that doesn't trigger you to be a good person, well, who knows, maybe you're not meant to be with that person. But this idea of Saturn, of loss, of understanding loss, of bearing loss, of thinking about those things, tend to make us better people in the long run if we can learn to embrace them. So consider this as a general way of working with Saturn. Maybe one day we'll refine this. Maybe we'll refine it for all the planets. But this was based on a question that was recently sent to me. And I hope it's helpful.